the headlines. Washington emphasizes close coordination with South Korea on their North Korea policy. Meanwhile, a U.S. think tank picks up signs of North Korea restarting its Yongbyon nuclear reactor after a 5-month hiatus. Concerns over Samsung losing its primacy in the global smartphone market rise as the tech giant reports its weakest profit in 3 years for 2014. And the Islamic State militant group is threatening to execute a captured Jordanian pilot unless an Iraqi would-be suicide bomber is released by the end of Thursday. The fate of a Japanese journalist also held for ransom remains unclear. Hello and welcome to ARIRANG News. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I am Kang Chae-ri. Signs that North Korea might be restarting its nuclear reactor. After it's been shut down for 5 months now, new satellite imagery is showing activity over at the North's main nuclear reactor. Our Connie Kim starts us off.
After nearly half a year of supposed inactivity, North Korea may have restarted operating its main nuclear reactor. Satellite imagery posted on the 38 North website shows hot water draining from a pipe at the 5-megawatt Yongbyon reactor and snow melting on the roof of the reactor and turbine buildings, possible signals that efforts to restart it are taking place inside. The U.S. Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins University, which runs 38 North, says the developments were observed over a 2-week period from December 24th to January 11th. It stresses, however, that it's too early to determine what exactly is happening at the reactor. This latest development comes as the two Koreas have been making overtures toward holding inter-Korean talks. On the other hand, U.S.-North Korea relations are frosty over North Korea's alleged cyber attack on Sony Pictures. Experts say that while suspicious, the latest activity at the reactor could be fairly innocuous.
It's hard to tell. The activities could be linked to simple maintenance procedures preparing for the summertime. However, if the Yongbyon reactor is being restarted, I think it'd be a means to pressure the U.S. more than South Korea.
The Yongbyon nuclear reactor is closely watched as it's where Pyongyang produces its weapons-grade plutonium. Adding to concerns, North Korea is thought to have made progress on its ballistic missile technology. Earlier this month, in its defense white paper, Seoul said the North had taken big steps toward making nuclear warheads small enough to fit on ballistic missiles. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Washington says it supports South Korea's efforts to improve inter-Korean ties despite its own recent moves to up the pressure on North Korea. Our Hwang Sung-hee has more.
U.S. Undersecretary of State Wendy Sherman reiterated that the United States and South Korea share the same policy when it comes to North Korea. This as Washington has been ramping up pressure on Pyongyang amid Seoul's efforts to improve inter-Korean relations, raising concerns that the two allies were losing coordination.
We have the same policy as the Republic of Korea does, and that is to ultimately have a denuclearized peninsula. Denuclearization is the first priority where North Korea is concerned.
Following a vice minister's meeting in Seoul on Thursday, Sherman said all members of the six-party nuclear talks, aside from North Korea, are working together to see what more they can do to engage Pyongyang. The multilateral dialogue involving the two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia, has been stalled for more than 6 years. Earlier this month, the U.S. rejected North Korea's offer to temporarily suspend nuclear tests in return for a halt in joint military drills between Seoul and Washington. It has been urging Pyongyang to take steps towards denuclearization before returning to talks, but Sherman declined to specify what those steps were.
North Korea needs to show concretely that it's taking steps towards denuclearization. There are many ways to do that. And I support our special envoy in his efforts, and I'm not going to list specifics either.
Sherman reiterated that Washington supports President Park Geun-hye's initiatives for inter-Korean dialogue, saying that the U.S. looks forward to the day the peninsula is unified. South Korea was the second leg of her three-nation tour, which also included China and Japan. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
And Washington says Russia is on board when it comes to the need to denuclearize North Korea as well. Top U.S. official on North Korea, Sung Kim, told reporters in Beijing that the North Korean leader's possible visit to Moscow in May is not changing Russia's stance on Pyongyang's nuclear program as agreed on in a joint six-party statement back in 2005. Sung Kim is currently in China to meet with U.S. and Chinese nuclear negotiators. Turning now to a revelation by former President Myungbak. The former South Korean president says that while he was in office, North Korea offered to hold an inter-Korean summit and apologize over the deadly torpedo attack on a South Korean warship if the South gave it 500,000 tons of rice. Our Hwang Ji has more.
Former South Korean President Myungbak has shed light on previously hidden history between the end of 2009 to early 2011. He says Pyongyang asked for 500,000 tons of rice in July 2010 in return for inter-Korean talks and its apology for the Cheonan warship sinking. This came in an extract reported by Seoul-based Yonhap news agency on Thursday ahead of the official release of his 800-page memoir on his presidency. The former president said he refused the offer because it would have been under Pyongyang's terms and he was not comfortable with it. He added the North's planned statement on the Cheonan warship sinking would have been a general apology, not an acceptance of its responsibility. He also said he strongly pressured then Chinese President Hu Jintao during a G20 meeting in June 2010 to enforce international sanctions against Pyongyang after the deadly sinking. On his highly controversial river restoration project, he pointed to other major government projects that faced criticism at the time but were evaluated to be successful by future generations. The Four Rivers Project, a signature project of the former leader, has long been under fire over alleged shady construction deals and the irreversible damage it has done to local ecosystems. Yi's book called President's Time is set to hit shelves next Monday. Hwang Ji, ARIRANG News.
Samsung Electronics' full earnings report for the fourth quarter of 2014 is out. It did better than the quarter before, but for the whole of 2014, it posted its weakest report in 3 years. Investors did not like this news, sending its shares lower by more than 1%. Song Ji-sun has the details.
Samsung Electronics has rebounded from its earnings shock in the third quarter of last year, but it's still underperforming compared to the previous year. Samsung's operating profit for the fourth quarter stood at $4.9 billion, up 30% from the previous quarter. That still marks a 36% on-year decrease, but the drop was slower than in the third quarter as Samsung's chip business reported strong sales at a 4-year high. Memory chips have become Samsung's biggest profit driver in the third quarter, overtaking handsets, and now account for more than half of the company's profit at $2.5 billion. Samsung's final Q4 figures come just days after its rival Apple announced a record net income of $18 billion for the same period, nearly 4 times higher than that of Samsung's. Profit for the mobile division plummeted to just $1.8 billion from 2013's $5 billion, and data from Strategy Analytics show that Samsung and Apple each sold 74.5 million units of smartphones in the last quarter. That's a 46% jump for Apple, but a 15% drop for Samsung in the sector, with Apple's large-screen iPhone 6 models in direct competition with the Korean tech giant. Samsung vowed to reinforce its high-end lineup with premium models, at the same time expanding its share in the low-end market by launching its mid-priced A3 and A5 models in the global market. Analysts forecast a modest recovery for the company this year on the back of demand for its memory chips and processors from its rival smartphone makers. Samsung also followed other Korean firms in committing to paying higher dividends to its shareholders by raising the amount by nearly 40% from a year earlier to $18 per share. Song Ji-sun, ARIRANG News.
When investors think of emerging markets worth putting money into, many still think of Brazil, Russia, India, and China, also known as the BRIC group. But some analysts suggest now is the time to look beyond those nations. Our Geunhye has more.
Apart from the BRIC countries, which do you think is the most promising emerging market this year? The Korea International Trade Association asked some 540 Korean companies this question, and the answer is Vietnam. In fact, most of the countries ranked high on the list were Southeast Asian countries, namely Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia. The top 15 nations also include Saudi Arabia, Mexico, and Poland. What's noticeable about these countries is their demographics. The Trade Association says young people between the ages of 15 and 24 make up a big portion of the population of those top 15 countries. This means they have a lot of room to grow, as these are the people who will lead future production and consumption. This is perhaps why more than half of the Korean firms surveyed said they're considering making inroads into those markets. As for the top choice, Vietnam, its economic growth last year hovered above the global average at 5.6% and is forecast to continue that momentum this year. The most volatile variable for Hanoi is crude oil prices. As an oil exporting country, falling crude prices will hurt its GDP, but Vietnamese officials say it will also help bring down the country's high inflation rate. But no matter what the case, experts warn that those wishing to enter these emerging markets, including Vietnam, will have to vigorously monitor the market conditions and utilize free trade agreements, as these countries often come with high risks. Geunhye, ARIRANG News.
The U.S. Fed has reiterated that it will remain patient in determining when to raise interest rates, citing the country's unusually low inflation at this point. However, it did say the U.S. economy is expanding at a solid pace. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
The Federal Reserve signaled its plans to raise its key interest rates sometime later this year. At the end of a two-day policy meeting in Washington on Wednesday, the U.S. Central Bank said it will be patient when determining the appropriate time to boost interest rates. What's worth noting here is the change in wording from when it said it would keep the rate unchanged for a considerable time. The Fed said that the U.S. economy was growing at a solid pace, citing improved labor market conditions with strong job gains and a lower unemployment rate. The central bank also said the declines in energy costs had boosted the purchasing power of households, and inflation has declined below the committee's longer-run objective. As for when it would lift the rates from the current 0.25% range, the Fed said that it would take into account a wide range of information, including measures of labor market conditions, inflation expectations, and ratings on financial and international developments. The central bank has kept interest rates low to stimulate the U.S. economy in the wake of the financial crisis. Analysts estimate a rate hike as early as June. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
President Park Geun-hye headed over to a daycare center in the western city of Incheon today to gather suggestions on ways to prevent child abuse. The president said the government will listen not only to experts but also to parents as well as caretakers on ways to improve child care policies. The president also talked about requiring all daycare centers to set up surveillance cameras. She added the move could help build trust between parents as well as daycare centers, though it's not a fundamental solution to the problem. Daycare centers have been in headlines in recent weeks here in Korea because of a string of child abuse cases. Korea's education ministry is aiming to strengthen the country's public safety education program in schools by bumping up the number of classroom hours and adding more opportunities for hands-on training. To test it out, they will run a pilot program at more than 50 schools around the country starting this month. Our Park Ji-won tells us more.
Since last year's tragic ferry disaster that claimed hundreds of innocent young lives, people have pointed to the lack of public safety education in Korea. In response, the nation's education ministry is aiming to strengthen public safety education for students.
The nation grieved over the Sewol-ho ferry tragedy. Life and safety are top priorities for the Park Geunhye administration, and we aim to give students public safety education to prevent such a tragedy from recurring.
Although the current law stipulates that students undergo 44 hours of public safety education per year, only 6 of those hours are related to disaster prevention. And most of the time is spent in lectures with few opportunities for hands-on training. So on Thursday, the education minister paid a visit to Korea's largest public safety education center located in Taebaek, Gangwon-do province to take a tour. The facility, called 365 Safe Town, provides hands-on training from life-saving techniques to three-dimensional disaster simulations. The ministry is considering establishing MOUs with safety awareness facilities such as this to provide kids with public safety education that's both fun and effective.
More than ever, we need to raise awareness about public safety among students. We will introduce policies so that public safety awareness facilities like this can be part of students' education.
This month, the Education Ministry will also designate 51 schools nationwide as locations for a pilot program for public safety. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News, Taebaek.
The Islamic State group has given Jordan until sundown to release a convicted terrorist or else risk the lives of 2 hostages. To tell us more about this story and others, Paul Lee is joining us from the news center. So Paul, these militants issued a new ultimatum that extended the 24-hour deadline on Wednesday. What are the terms of this proposed prisoner swap?
Well, the group is threatening to immediately execute a captured Jordanian fighter pilot unless the Iraqi would-be suicide bomber is released near the Turkish border by the end of this Thursday. However, the fate of the Japanese journalist, who is also being held for ransom, remains unclear. This as officials are desperately trying to resolve this hostage crisis before time runs out. Our Kim Ji-yeon has the latest.
Islamic State militants have set a new deadline for swapping Iraqi prisoner Sajida al-Rishawi for a captured Jordanian pilot. A message allegedly from IS says al-Rishawi should be delivered to the Turkish border by sunset on Thursday. It says the Jordanian hostage will be executed immediately if Jordan does not hand her over by the new deadline. Jordanian state TV quoted government spokesman Mohammed al-Momani as saying Amman is willing to make the exchange.
The Jordanian government spokesperson said it is ready to free Sajida al-Rishawi if First Lieutenant al-Kasabi is safely released from IS captivity.
Momani said the release of the pilot, who comes from a prominent family in Jordan, is important to the monarchy. But the exchange would go against Amman's policy of not negotiating with extremists and could potentially set a new precedent. Amid the crossroads, the father of the pilot demanded the government secure his son's swift release.
Jordanians should push their government to protect the life of their son, or otherwise your king is the one who killed him in his stubbornness. You have to know that my son will not be the last soldier or Jordanian citizen who will be sacrificed.
The Jordanian pilot was captured in northern Syria in December when his F-16 fell from the sky. Sajida al-Rishawi has been behind bars for over a decade for attempting a suicide bomb attack in Jordan. There was no mention of the Japanese hostage Kenji Koto in the new offer, also being held by Islamic State. Tokyo says it's working closely with Jordan for Koto's release. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
And now shifting to Indonesia, officials there have revealed the first pieces of data recovered from the black box of the AirAsia plane that crashed in the Java Sea. Tell us, Paul, what new evidence has been uncovered?
Well, Chief Investigator for Indonesia's Transport Safety Committee revealed that the French first officer was piloting the passenger jet at the time of the accident. This is when the plane abruptly climbed at an unusually high speed before stalling in midair. Speaking in Jakarta on Wednesday, Dr. Suso Sarwarno said the plane was in sound conditions to fly, meaning it was safely operating within weight limits with no evidence of a compromised cabin crew. He added that data from the flight recorder provided what he called a clear picture of what happened in those final moments.
The plane was in sound condition to fly before the crash, and it has operated within the weight and balance envelope. The co-pilot, or second-in-command SIC, who is usually seated on the right of the cockpit, was, at that moment, the one controlling the aircraft.
Officials say a full final report is expected to take at least another 6 to 7 months to complete. AirAsia Flight 8501 was carrying 162 people when it lost contact over a month ago while en route to Surabaya from Singapore.
And turning to China, Paul, where booming investment firms and Chinese tycoons are buying up overseas companies at record pace. What's behind this major shift in capital?
Well, analysts say we're seeing a rise in outbound activity as many Chinese companies are looking to diversify their business as they begin to outgrow their home markets. The number of merger and acquisition deals coming out of China reached record levels in 2014. Leading the pack is Asia's richest man, Li Ka-shing, who recently announced a buyout of Britain's Evershort Rail and mobile carrier O2.
It's something of a perfect storm for M&E. So you've got in the domestic market, you've got a slowing economy in China, so companies looking for M&A as a source of inorganic growth. You have consolidation in many industry sectors in China, squeezing out excess capacity and competitive capacity.
The trend is expected to stay strong with an estimated $20 billion already spent so far this year by Chinese firms on offshore properties.
And finally, a social networking giant Facebook has beat market expectations in its latest earnings report. This as the company is on track to post another year of heavy investment in new startups. Give us a breakdown of the numbers.
Well, some of the respectable figures include Facebook's overall revenue in the fourth quarter hitting $3.85 billion. That's a 49% growth in revenue compared to a year earlier. That sizable bump, however, was offset by a roughly 87% in operating expenses from marketing to research and development costs. The world's largest online social network saw its biggest jump in mobile advertising, which accounted for nearly 70% of its earnings.
Facebook did exceed expectations. One of the most interesting things about the company, frankly, is that its reliance on mobile devices is really growing. Just the number of people who use Facebook through a mobile device is stunning. They're reaching into the top 80% of people who are logging onto the network either daily or monthly are doing so on a mobile device.
Investors were less than impressed by the mixed performance as Facebook shares fell about 2.6% in after-hours trading on Wall Street. Charity?
All right, so let's see if it's a heavy spending on marketing will pay off in the next quarter. Thank you so much, Paul, for these stories, and we will see you again in just about 2 hours.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather outlook. We begin with news of snow and showers falling down south. In fact, a heavy snowfall watch has been issued for Jeollanam-do province, where up to 5 centimeters will fall through tomorrow. Elsewhere, 1 to 3 centimeters is expected. As for the rain, 5 to 10 millimeters will drop over Jeollanam-do and Gyeongsangnam-do provinces as well as Jeju. So if you're in those areas, make sure to have an umbrella handy. Well, those in Jeollanam Jeollanam-do province should keep a heads up as heavy snow may pile up overnight, leading to some frustration on the roads tomorrow morning. So be aware of that. And other than that, temperatures will continue to stay on the seasonal average range, but wind chills could make conditions feel slightly colder than the actual numbers. Looking ahead, a brief cold snap is set for Saturday morning. On to tomorrow's readings. The high here in the capital hits 2, while a snowy morning is expected for Daegu and Gwangju. Meanwhile, Jeju and Dokdo should reach a high of 6, Mount Kumgang -9. Those are the updates we're following at this hour. I'll be back with more after 10.
Thanks, Bo-kyung, and that will do it for this edition of ARIRANG News. Thanks for watching.